Welcome to the 192nd episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Justin Go, author of the debut novel, The Steady Running of the Hour. Stay tuned for the interview. Well, welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Justin Go, author of the new novel, The Steady Running of the Hour. Justin, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Great. Well, can I have you read the first couple of pages of your novel, The Steady Running of the Hour?
Absolutely. I'll just start with this is the prologue, and it's called The Fortune. The letter came by courier last week. I knew when I touched the envelope that it was fine stationery. I knew from the paper, the porous surface of pure cotton rag, the watermark that shone through as I held it to the light. The letter is in my bag in the overhead compartment, but I imagine the cream fibers, the feel of the engraved letterhead. Twining and Hooper, solicitors, 11 Bedford Row, London. The courier knocked at my door, the letter and a clipboard in his hands. He asked for my name. It's a special service, he explained. Cinder requested we check ID. I showed the courier my driver's license and signed the delivery bill. He set the letter in my hands. On my kitchen counter, I pulled the plastic zipper of the express envelope. Inside there was a smaller envelope of cream bun stalks. I read the letter, standing over the sink. Dear Mr. Campbell, I am trustee of an estate of which a substantial portion remains to be distributed. Information has recently come to light that suggests a significant connection between you and the named beneficiary. As we could find no current telephone number for you, we've dispatched this letter to your listed home address in the hope of making urgent contact. I cannot stress enough that the proper resolution of this matter is our utmost concern. Accordingly, I would be most grateful if you could telephone me at your earliest convenience, reverse charge, using the direct dial number listed above. For your own benefit, please retain this matter in the strictest confidence until we have had the opportunity to speak. Yours sincerely, J.F. Pritchard, Solicitor, Private Client, sworn on behalf of Twining and Hooper, LLP.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about your new novel yet, how would you describe The Steady Running of the Hour?
Yeah, well, it sort of starts with that letter I just read, and it's about a young guy. These London solicitors reach out to him and say, we think you might be heir to this fortune. It was left by a British mountaineer who was also a soldier in World War One, to a woman that was his lover during World War One. And if the young American can prove that he's related to this woman, then he can inherit the fortune. And so it's sort of a quest story involving the young man who goes to Europe and tries to find out about this past, and then it switches between that past and between his quest and the actual past. World War One and the 1920s Everest expedition, and really the relationship between Ashley and Imogen, the two historical characters.
Gotcha. And as you just mentioned, there's this historical section or timeline in the novel, which involves World War One and the early attempts to scale Mount Everest. Do you remember what sparked your initial interest in those historical events or eras?
Yeah, in the case of Everest, it was really I think I got interested when a lot of people did, honestly, during the '96 Everest disaster, and Into Thin Air came out right after that. And I was in high school, and I read about that, and then I started wondering, why do people climb mountains, and just some basic questions about, what is it like to be a mountaineer? But then I also started, that book and other things made me aware of George Mallory and the first attempts to climb Everest in the 1920s, which is just a totally different world. And very romantic in certain ways, and shrouded in mystery because they don't know whether Mallory disappeared on his summit attempt in 1924, and it's possible that he might have actually climbed the mountain first before Stratton and Hillary. So I guess the sort of mystery and also romance of the mountaineering of the 1920s was one of my ways into the story.
And in terms of World War One, was that just
very much the same thing. It's like they were separate interests that only came together at the last moment. I had, read about the war and been interested in it since I was a kid. I read Elk White on the Western Front when I was in school. And I never really thought that I was an aficionado of it per se, but I'd always felt sort of tied to it, almost as if I had some sort of personal connection, which I didn't. I grew up in Southern California, and I don't know that I have any relatives who even fought in it, but it always really intrigued me, the mud and the trenches and what we think of is the war on the Western Front. And at one point, I was reading the letters of Wilfred Owen, the war poet, who's where the book gets its title from one of his poems, and I realized, I was touched by their beauty, and at some point I realized that all the people who had been in the 20s Everest expeditions had also gone through the war, and it seemed like such a powerful set of experiences to go through. And I kind of that was when I first started thinking about, well, what were their lives like, and what would it be like if something from the past came out and touched somebody in the present.
Sure, sure. So when you started thinking about that, did you do a lot of research before you started writing the novel, or did you start working on it and then kind of figure out what you needed to research as part of writing the novel? What was that process like?
Actually, I probably should have done what you suggested and figured out what I actually needed to know instead of just blindly researching. I think, but that's part of the process, because it's really unclear what you actually need to know. And I'm kind of going through this all over again, every time you start a new story, because part of the process of writing a historical book is figuring out what really interests you. Even if you say you knew that you were writing a book about Everest or about the war, you need to find your characters. And so you want to know, what social class are they from? What are they interested in? What kind of music do they listen to? Everything about them, And so that, it started off very, very broad. So I did start researching before I started writing, but I very quickly started writing and kind of was researching and writing continuously. But so I tried to write the parts that I could write. So I wrote a lot of the parts involving Fist and the present day character. And sometimes I would write scenes where I didn't know, all the details, and then the historical details for things, I would fill them in. But I felt tremendous pressure to get the details right for the Everest, and especially for the war stuff. And so those scenes were written nearly last. But the research was a never-ending process. I mean, I was researching up into copy editing. So not even that long ago, I was still in the library checking things.
Sure. And I'm curious, I mean, given that, did you have anyone, did you have any kind of early readers or proofreaders with knowledge of those events or?
No, and in fact, that what you got, that would have made it a lot easier. I had no readers. I had no readers of any kind, not even really fiction readers. Just to read for the prose or for the story or whatever, because I was really out on my own. I didn't. It was a really personal project, and it only sort of turned the corner at the last moment. Even though I was committed to it, I didn't show it to anybody until I was done. Sure. And I'd never taken a writing class, and I was scared about, what it meant, what I was doing, what it meant, and whether it was working. And so probably the last thing I would have wanted to do would be to show it to an expert in any field.
Sure.
But
sure.
Eventually I had to get an agent and all that.
Well, that's kind of interesting. I mean, so tell me about that. I mean, you said that you had never written or taken a writing class. So what kind of made you decide, I'm going to sit down and write this novel that's kind of, a quest novel from the present, but with this historical background and timeline? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I had written a little bit of I tried to write a novel before, but it was definitely like a very amateurish thing where I had lived in Europe and I had sort of a bohemian life, and I'd met some inspiring people who encouraged me to write. And so I had done that, but then it had just been like a hobby, and I hadn't studied creative writing, and I'd never written a short story or anything or published anything. So when I started writing this book and I got the idea in my head, reading that historical stuff, a lot of it just came out of, I don't know, some personal desire to have more from my life, writing it just on the side after I got home I was working at a law firm in New York at the time, and I'd get home and write on the evenings or weekends or start plotting the book. So it wasn't clear. I mean, although I believed in the book on some level, it wasn't clear that it was going to become something as serious as it did. It was sort of an ongoing process by which it gradually kind of gathered momentum. And then eventually I thought, I'm going to quit my job. And I quit my job and moved to Berlin to write it. But even as I was doing that, I didn't really know what, I didn't quite believe that it was happening. I mean, and I had to learn how to, as far as the actual writing of the novel goes, I basically learned by trial and error, the old fashioned way, I suppose, where you learn from reading. I would look at books to see how the writers that I admired, who were for the most part, dead anyway, or gone, did stuff. And and that was my model.
That's interesting. So you just mentioned, I mean, who are the writers that you admire or that inspire you?
A lot of early 20th century stuff. So really the stuff from this period. I like Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Faulkner, the American writers, and also the British, um, Virginia Woolf, Ian Forster, and later people, George Orwell. So, a lot of all different kinds of people, really. I mean, I guess I suppose you could say that I sort of took what was useful from different people. And in a way, sometimes I really I admire a very kind of clean, sort of stripped down prose style like Hemingway or Orwell used. But at the same time, I would find myself going off into something much more flowery sometimes, and I would try to cut it down. So even what you read doesn't necessarily, what comes out of you is sometimes surprising. But I think I really started. I wrote this book because I had this sort of same taste as the period that I'm writing. That the kind of the way that they used to write then, and since I didn't really read it later stuff, it really became like an organic style almost. Like I was influenced by this stuff because I was reading it for historical sources, but it was also just the kind of writing that I grew to like. But I also tried to maintain in the book, there's somewhat of two distinct styles, because there's Tristan's story, the American story, which I think I tried to make a little bit more American and sort of like taut, and terse and kind of shorter. And then the third person style, the historical style, which is probably a little bit more, a little bit more descriptive, I would say.
Gotcha. And how long was that process that you just described of where you were, starting to do the research, and then you started writing, and you were working at the law firm, and until you kind of, I guess, typed the words at the end?
I would say, God, I mean, it's the thing is the timelines are never as neat as they
sure.
sound. From the moment that I had the idea of the book until now, it was about 7 years.
Okay.
And so from the moment that I started writing the book, I would say it was about a year before I quit my job and moved to work on it full time. And I would say that when I moved to Berlin after in the second year of the book is when I wrote most of the first draft. And then I probably finished it in around the third year. And then I spent, 2 years probably revising it, first with my agent and then with my editor. And then there's probably a year of sort of, copy editing, sort of cleanup and other things, stuff like that.
Sure.
So in the end, it somehow kind of, with other delays at various points, it sort of goes into 7 years. But I mean, it wasn't like, there were always moments in which you were working a lot harder than others, I suppose.
Sure. And what was the path to publication like? I mean, first of all, do you remember who the first person was outside of yourself that you showed it to, or did you send it to agents without any of your friends or acquaintances?
I sent it to friends and, waited with bated breath and heard nothing because nobody read it, which was incredibly discouraging. And I'd started writing something else, and I kind of was like, maybe this book is such a mess because it had just been driving me crazy with the plot lines that switch back and forth and stuff like that. It had given me a lot of trouble, and I was pretty close to giving up because I was really sick of it. And my mom sort of convinced me that I should send it to agents, and which I had been planning to do, but hadn't really. I've been honestly kind of scared because I'd gone so long without learning about the business that I was worried that I would find that I had done everything wrong. But that had kind of been a motivating factor. Don't get involved in the business, And so I sort of hastily made up a list of agents, and sent it to one. And he immediately asked for the manuscript, and after he read it, or he called me the night that I sent the manuscript and said that he was going to stay up all night reading it, and he sent me a contract in the morning.
Wow.
And so I had to hastily kind of submit it to a bunch of other agents because I couldn't just go with the first guy that I had signed up for, or that I thought of. But it was actually the most stressful part of my life because it was also extremely exciting and completely surreal to hear other people be talking about something that had been intensely private to me.
Right.
It's like people reading your mind. These characters felt like they were just, mine, and suddenly, other people were talking about it as if it was a real book.
And what was the publication process like once the agent sent it in for publishers? Was there an auction?
Yeah, but I mean, again, it kind of went through these cycles where,
sure.
I got my agent, and it was, I went to New York and met agents and chose one, and that was super exciting. and then we sort of worked on it forever, and then it was really boring. And I was out on, in my writing game for a while, and then suddenly, the manuscript was finished, and then it was another exciting thing where it went to auction, and I talked, I talked to the people who were bidding. So I had, I don't know, 7 or 8 conversations with editors who were interested in the book within a week or something, which it made it very difficult to get them all straight, because they were, a lot of them were the same age, and they were almost all women. And, but and so it was very exciting though. And then, they would tell you what they thought about the book, and what they thought maybe they would like to work on, and you would say whether you were comfortable with it and stuff. And then it went to auction, and then, we decided to go with Simon & Schuster, who published the book. But yeah, it was a tremendously exciting period.
That's amazing. So did any of your friends end up reading the manuscript?
Yeah, of course. I found out later that one of my friends had actually read it, like, when I first sent it out, and she was like, "Oh, I thought it was so good." And I was like, "You read it? Why didn't you tell me? I could have used it before." But yeah, I mean, although I have to say, on the other hand, also, some people, I think, like another one of my friends, right before I think it went out to agents, and I was getting it signed, who was one of my best friends, and really supportive, told me, "Look, I don't think the book's ready." And he knew something about the publication process. He said, "I don't think it's ready, and I think you need to work on it. And, you need to change this stuff." And I think in a way he was right, because he anticipated some of the things that have been changed. But I also think when it comes to your friends, they might not always be the best readers, because they can't see it. I don't know.
Sure.
Their perspective is different. It's like you're kind of reluctant to be a friend as a writer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, are you comfortable talking about what you're working on now?
Yeah, but there's not that much to talk about, unfortunately, because I haven't gotten too far. I'm working on another historical book. I mean, I sort of thought about doing other stuff, but I think I'm going to do other stuff later.
Sure.
I'm going to do one more to sort of try to master the form, since I spent so much time working on it before. But I think it'll take place just in the past, in the 1920s. So it sort of starts when this one ends. This book ends in the mid-20s, and which is right really on the cusp of the very exciting period of the late 1920s, the crazy 20s. And in Europe, that meant, expat artists on the left bank, and, cabaret in Berlin, but also political instability and the lead up to the Second World War. So it'll be in the 20s and 30s and all over Europe probably, and will also, I think, involve some adventure, what we might call adventure, like this other book. But I'm right now, again, at that stage we were talking about earlier where I'm looking at a sea of research, and I'm trying to narrow it down to the story that really calls to me, because I know I'm going to be working on it for a long time.
Sure. Well, given your success with writing and then getting the steady running of the Hour published, do you have advice for other writers who may want to get their own stories or novels published?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I would say that on the one hand, I think it really helps to work hard on your stuff and bring it up to a very, to the best standard that you can. I certainly tried hard to bring the prose quality up to the standard, the best standard that I could for my book. After I'd finished, I just line edited the words themselves over and over again. And so when I finally submitted to agents, I think the writing was as good as I could make it. But at the same time, you can't stay. It's a tricky balance between you got to do the best you can, but you can't. At some point, you got to be brave and just show it to other people. And I think a beginning writer is always sort of walking the fine line between you have to be humble, but you also have to believe in your stuff. And you have to be willing to learn from everybody and to sort of take advice. But on the other hand, I think you have to also have some, you have to have some drive. You can't just do whatever everybody says. Otherwise you wind up with, like a Hollywood movie, which is written by committee. I mean, great writing is the product of one person's intelligence. So I think, I guess in the end though, we all have to believe in ourselves, because, if the book hadn't been picked up, or if all this stuff hadn't happened, the whole time that I was writing this book, I really didn't think anything of myself. I was afraid to call myself a writer. And now I call myself a writer, and all I'm doing is going around on a book tour, So I feel like, on some level, you can't let the world decide whether you're a writer. And although you should be willing to learn, I think you also, you should try to take pride in what you do, and just let yourself be a writer and work through it, and be patient. And because no matter where you get, whether now that my book is published and stuff, there's always going to be ups and downs, and you can see that in the careers of all the great writers.
Sure.
There were moments where, Hemingway or Fitzgerald, when Fitzgerald died, The Great Gatsby, the original printings were still in the Scrivener's warehouse. They never even sold out of them. But does that mean the book wasn't good? Now it's like this great classic. And so I mean, you can't leave yourself. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you can't leave your self-esteem or your sense of worth as a writer up to the world. I mean, you got to learn from everybody, but also believe in your work and just be pleased that you did it at all. And that's something I try to remember every day because it's hard.
Right. So what was the process like for you once Simon and Schuster purchased the book? The editing process, was that difficult for you, or did you welcome it after so long of working on it yourself?
Well, actually, the thing is, and in my case, and I think in a lot of people's cases, you do a lot of editing with your agent now.
Sure.
Because of the nature of the publishing houses that's changed and for various reasons. So I would say that I had already been editing the book for about a year with my agent by the time it was sold, because that agent wants to get it in the best shape possible for sale. So I was really familiar with the editing process of both my editor and agent. It was pretty much a very kind of cordial written process involving back and forth with the draft and editorial letters and emails and some phone conversations, but it was not some kind of, like screaming match over whether or not I could do this or that, or even, it was just not that dramatic. I think a lot of it was really focused on, let's say, like character motivation.
Sure.
It wasn't like, we're going to change this. We need to change this plot element. It was more like, we need to understand why this happened.
Yeah.
And we need to show this development in a character in this way or that way, which is a good challenge. And, I learned a lot from it. I would only say that the only hard part about it is just, especially if it's your first book, you're just waiting so long for it to come out.
Yeah.
That was the frustrating thing. Right? I think that hopefully I'll be more patient with this one because the book's already out, and I can tell people I have a book and whatever. But I think sometimes I would get down on myself and think, gosh, 7 years just to do one book, and so can write a book in a year or whatever. But I mean, you can't think that way. And in the end, of course, most writers are not remembered for a shelf of books, but for one or two books. So
sure. So what are you reading now?
Oh gosh, I'm reading so many books at once. I'm reading the book called The Word Exchange. I'm actually doing a literary event in New York next week. It's by Alina Graydon, and it's a sort of like a dystopian book about a future in which words are sort of bought and sold, and everybody's addicted to these handheld devices that are sort of like smartphones, but much more intrusive and make decisions for you. It's a really a pretty gripping or intriguing story. I'm also reading a lot of history books about the First World War, because in July will be the 100th anniversary. And I've been doing sort of panels and talking about, and it's often come up on tour. So I'm reading a book called The War That Ended Peace by Margaret Macmillan, which is sort of a book about the outbreak of World War I. Gosh, I don't know. There's always, and I was just starting to read The Sun by Philip Meyer, but I haven't gotten very far.
Gotcha.
There's always so much stuff to read. The thing is, once you're a writer, and then you've got other stuff to read. You've got both your research books, but then suddenly people are sending you books, or you get access to free books, so you're doing these events, and then it becomes crazy. The only way I can kind of manage to keep at it nowadays is by listening to audiobooks, because it gives me more time to read when I'm not sitting behind a desk.
Right. Well, great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Justin Go, author of the new novel, The Steady Running of the Hour. His novel is available in bookstores now, so go grab a copy. Justin, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
The stockings are hung and the shopping has begun. This holiday season, shop Cincinnati favorite gift cards at Kroger. Grab a gift card to La Rosa's and enjoy a warm slice of pizza, or snag a gift card to Grater's and treat yourself to something sweet. Whoever you're shopping for, you'll earn 4 times fuel points on Cincinnati favorite gift cards. Head over to giftcards.kroger.com/Cincinnati-favorites to complete your shopping list and support our local businesses. Available in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Louisville markets only. Restrictions apply. See website for details.